says streaming. Here we go. All right, Daniel Hewett, here we are.
Hey, Dale. How are you?
I'm very good, my friend. Thank you for joining us on this wonderful Good Friday. It's the best of Fridays. I've got my tea. How are you?
Yes, I'm good. Everyone drink your water.
Exactly. Stay well hydrated. I'm very excited by this. And I think the message that I want to get out to everybody watching this right now is how vital a role your job on any sort of video or film production is. And I, just as a personal anecdote, I know that I've been involved in several productions where, audio has fallen by the wayside for whatever reason, and it's caused us to either have to go back and reshoot, and we put all this effort into making the image look as good as possible, and because the audio failed, it meant the whole thing failed. And so sure. The vital importance that we need to place on audio to make sure that our productions are excellent, I think is something that every producer, every director, every DP needs to understand. Our mutual friend, Martin Wushtunik, said to me that the DP is quality control, and they've got to know everything really, really well because the buck sort of stops with them. And so it's just as equally important for DPs as well to understand how vital audio is and in what way. And I think that you're a great gateway for that and helping the audience understand that. So before we launch into everything that you're going to tell us today, I want to play, basically it's your trailer that you show to producers and stuff. And it's a great overview of the type of work that you've done. And I'm going to cut to that right now, shall we? Here we go.
I spent my last money on a DSLR and started shooting photos and fell in love with photography. I see myself as an adventure capitalist. I see my currency as cultural experiences and adventures that I'm having out in the world.
When I blow, things happen. I can't explain it.
It's from here and here. Both.
Instrument of love. The saxophone playing gospel music? They said you're joking.
This is a new sport. We're less like the NFLs and the NBAs and more like the action sport.
This is gonna go full scale, as big as football.
Speed bumps and roadblocks.
I'm freaking out right now.
Detours and face-offs.
Mind blown.
Celebrate our great country with a new season of The Amazing Race Canada.
Hey, a city that disappeared overnight.
They want to hear that there is evidence.
It's part of some kind of civilization.
This is Atlantean architecture.
This was the corner where I hustled at. 1, 2, 3, all 4 corners. We was out here like 20 deep, and then my man D-Rock brought B.I.G. up to me, and he approached me and said, I want you to be my DJ.
People are waking up. People are saying no more.
Society took our land away from us. We need to protect it.
I will stand and fight for this place.
Hayes, $500,000 at stake.
This is dangerous.
Will they make it to the other side?
On the other side of the world, those people who are the most affected by climate change, most affected by environmental injustice, have the least responsibility for creating this crisis in the first place.
Indila mabatu saro. Inil saro. Inil ila takun ba.
Aku pekelok ekonom. Tapi cerita adik dengan tanah alam retak kelakau ke esya kejam ke. Bek pun inu mesti kuat awah bebe.
The way of life that we live, it's very simple.
What I try to do when I'm writing, I try to talk to the reader like someone they know. I'm trying to write as if I'm writing to a friend. You won't believe what I've just seen. That's the key to getting people to understand what's going on.
I was proud of what I achieved this year. It is a deep truth. But joy is something else.
Well, yeah. Let's be entirely clear. I think that is a that is a collaborative effort. Yeah, yeah. Mm. I would say, I mean, coming from a like an engineering recording background, um, there is no money in rock and roll. You know, there's something to be said for being able to support your family, and also I think I was the travel, the excitement, steady income, working collaboratively with incredible technicians. You know, on a show like Amazing Race, I am fortunate enough to work with some of the best technicians in Canada, if not North America, on a regular basis. So it's a real gift. Fill the void. Yeah, sure. So Dale is working on solving his audio issues. He is a DP, so he gets an ounce of forgiveness. I think it's important to like look back and reflect. No job was better than any other. I mean, I think it really is. It's the gift that keeps on giving, to be steadily employed and to be working consistently. And also, diversifying is really critical in terms of maintaining and your skill set. Whether you're working with kind of like on a collaborative effort with just a DP and a director, or just a DP, or you're working on a set of 65 people. I think it's super, super important to keep yourself in the stream at all times, because things change, technology changes, and it's the kind of thing where there are like fundamental skills, which are your bedrock. The rest of the time, there is like, you want to know what the latest and greatest camera is. You want to know like varying degrees of technology that are going to affect your work, how you're going to work with a technical director on a big show. So there is something to be said for staying relevant, staying active.
Awesome. Good news, Daniel. My audio's back.
Yes, amazing.
It's because I turned my microphone off when we were playing your video, and I forgot to turn it back on again.
Fantastic.
I'm sure that's never happened to you, but it happens to guys like me all the time. Any particular moments in those 20 years where it was ever present and ever like a deep reminder of how valuable audio can become, in terms of a moment where there was such a key part of the story that was derived from the audio, and that really elevated everything else? Like some of those key moments for you that you saw?
Yeah, I look at it this way. It's my job. It's our job as sound recordists to make sure that everything we get is as good as we can possibly, as good as it can possibly be. And I think it's not necessarily in the moment. It's not our job to be editors. I mean, we really have to go out there and we have to be very cognizant of how important it is that a project or a film or a TV show is basically made in post. So in terms of there have been moments where the camera's gone down and we've only been able to like record audio for whatever reason, and then that audio became VO for an important sequence of scenes. So it's there is, I don't know, there's, if you ask anybody, they're going to say that their department is the most important department, right? So I feel like but at the same time, that marriage of visual and audio together is so critical. And, you can have scenes saved by having good audio clips that'll kind of extrapolate and explain a situation, right? Yeah. That you didn't necessarily, that you weren't able to get on the day shooting a scene.
Yeah, and we actually have a question from the chat, and this is perfectly lined up with the next question I actually had for you, which is, we learn the most from our most challenging moments. Can you talk to us about, a couple key or some of the most challenging moments that you've had to sort of manage and deal with in your line of work?
Sure. I think recently, I think getting fired is great. I think, honestly, I think if you want to really, because it's so often we will insulate ourselves because we are putting ourselves out there on the front line, especially the audio department, because we're directly interacting with talent. And I've had situations working on a small crew where the dynamic wasn't healthy for whatever reason, or there is a perception that you are overstepping, and it's resulted in there being a change of the guard, so to speak. And I think that is a moment of reflection. I think as far as I'm concerned, we're only as good as our last job, or you could say in our case, we're only as good as our last shot. So we have to constantly be analyzing how we're perceived, because at the end of the day, the reason that you get called back for a job is because of your brand, who you are, how people perceive you. So that to me is a major wake-up call. And it can all be chalked up to maybe the things weren't in sync, things weren't grooving, and that's okay too. Because rarely are we willing to actually bow out of something gracefully. Mm-hmm. So I think, and it doesn't have to be the end of your career. It doesn't have to be, but it definitely needs to be a learning moment.
And I think that's, probably one of the most key important things in terms of like anybody's craft is about how you relate to people on set. And that goes regardless of what department you're in. One of the amazing things that I can tell, for the audience, you and I have worked together several times. And every time I'm on set with you and you walk away with the experience of working with Daniel Hewett, you bring a lot of personality to your craft, and it goes so far beyond just being a good, competent sound recordist, because you're also interacting with talent a lot as well.
Sure.
And watching you interact with talent and how careful and considerate you are, how helpful you are to the whole production, really makes me feel, at least, and all the producers that I've worked with have also commented about how amazing you are with that, and how it puts talent at ease and it makes them comfortable, and that goes such a long way, not just the technical expertise. Can you speak to that a little, about how you talk to talent, how you manage working with directors and producers, and just how you maintain that peace, right?
Sure. And to that point, I think it's important to categorize what's the job. Are we talking about are we on a commercial where there is there's a defined hierarchy in terms of how things go, and you are just one member of one department, and everything goes through the chain where I'm not speaking to the director at that point. I'm actually directly interacting with the AD, and or are we working on a very collaborative documentary, small crew, where everybody is part of the process. So I think it's I think it's there's something to be said for setting up a protocol and understanding exactly what you're getting into on the day, and recognizing that because as someone in the sound department, we are being physical with talent, right? There is we're the ones who are actually dealing with wardrobe, getting into a situation where it can be very, very personal. So, like right from the get-go, it's critical that we put talent at ease, that we enter a situation where we're being ultra sensitive in terms of how we're approaching it, because there is a knock-on effect for the rest of the project. And even the number of times that we've done, let's say I'm working on a doc and our day is packed and we have to do 3 interviews that day. We have to get in and get out. And as you well know, I mean, you come into someone's home or their personal space and you're setting up lights and cameras and tripods. I mean, it's a big thing, and it's a huge intrusive effort, right? Mm-hmm. And we're like, and we have 2 hours. We have to get everything. We have to get the best that we possibly can, and then get out, right? Yeah. So, showing the utmost respect and consideration is really our number one priority. And it should be, obviously.
And I'd like to now sort of transition a little bit into some technical stuff, because the amount of technical knowledge that you have is, pretty outstanding when we're in a position to give advice to sort of newer producers or directors or, DP shooters, people who are required to do sound or at least understand the value of sound on set. And the first thing I always point to when we're talking about getting good audio for any production is choosing the right location. And you'll have a director or a DP or a producer or whatever go to location for a location scout and choose it, and not think too much about, is there, a refrigerator on that we can't unplug, or is there, a plane flying, are we in a flight path, things like that. When you're going on these scouts and you're initially consulting or working with to choose locations, or you're advising on a team that's going to go ahead and look at locations, what kind of things are you telling them?
Well, I mean, I'm going to always say, certainly to producers, bring a sound person with you. And if your lead mixer can't make it, bring some representative. Bring the boom person. Bring an A2. Bring somebody, because they'll be able to red flag potential issues, and at least communicate that there are times when you show up and you are stuck with what you have and you have to work with it on the day, and there's nothing really much that you can do about it. One thing I just wanted to, I know that you're going to post these articles. Thomas Varga, who is a Oscar-winning sound mixer, something he says that really that's resonated within me, I think encapsulates exactly what it's like to be on set. If I was read to right now, we can only record what is in the room. If the room is noisy, our recordings include that noise. It doesn't make a difference what mics you use. All the subtleties of the human voice, the quiet breaths and sighs, the minute details, all add to the effectiveness of a performance. It is our job to capture it to the best of our ability, even if that means risking popularity. In the end, we can only hope that the battles we fight are appreciated. So that's certainly part of that process. And sometimes we show up on location and that's just the way it is. You're on a flight path. So you better choose that 2.5 minute take, at the right time, because that's just the way it goes. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you do everything that you possibly think you can do, and then there is a hailstorm on the day, and there is a metal roof, right? And that's it. That's just it. So at some point, more than anything else, I think it's critically important, and that's happened to me recently, where I was working on a couple of productions. You have to pick your battles, right? Everything can't be a war, and you need to decide when to speak up and when to just be quiet.
And, what I'm also looking for here is, for people who might be new to this production, what are some of the main things that they should be looking out for when scouting? Like I kind of mentioned a couple there,
sure.
Like, refrigerator and things like that.
I mean,
what are the big errors?
Easy, man. Fridges are easy. Massive HVAC systems. I mean, this is another thing that comes to mind is being, doing a show I just worked on, the lead mixer went in the summer and it sounded fine. And he basically red flagged all the issues. And then we shot in the fall, and guess what? There was a huge noisy HVAC system that wasn't on, and that wasn't. So you're heating this huge volume of studio, and what are you gonna? You're gonna ask talent to freeze because we have to turn off the off the HVAC? Like that's not gonna happen. So, I mean, more than anything else, and it's a really simple exercise, is that I would say have the producer or a director walk into a space and close their eyes, and for 2 minutes, just absolute silence. And if something's going to manifest, and you will pick it up on the day. You know, walk in, clap your hands, listen to the reverb of the space. Really basic stuff. Because a lot of times when and I've been on shoots, I've been on scouts where we do walk in and everyone's first reaction is, this looks fine, right? And I understand that, right? But something can look great. I mean, I did a shoot once where it was a commercial shoot, and we walked in, and it was an old, beautiful hotel. I mean, visually stunning, but the floors were 120 years old, and I took one step in the room, and the creaking was tremendous, and then the camera department started to lay dolly track. And what can we do? I mean, you know, there's just, at that point, you just have to let go.
Yeah. And one of the question that I was sort of skipping past, but I did want to ask is, like, you know, obviously when we're miking people up, we're miking lav mics, and we're also trying to do boom as well. And so when you're miking people up with lav mics, what's your strategy when people are wearing like either really tight clothing or clothing where like it's just not possible to hide a lav or clip a lav onto? What are some of your strategies?
Sure. Well, I'm going to say this. Having just worked on Drag Race Canada, where I can you know, hand on my heart, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that was the most challenging show for hiding mics and hiding packs I've ever worked on in my life, and that is a common sentiment amongst everyone who was in the sound department. So, you know, nothing's impossible, and that's why it's critically important that you work and respect. You work well and respect the wardrobe department, because they can either be your best friend or your ally, or, you know, depending on your attitude. Like, you can't just barge in there and say that this outfit doesn't work. Like, someone has put in a lot of work, a lot of time, choosing, sewing, sourcing material to actually make it. So it may be impossible, seemingly, to lav, but at the same time, you need to work with that premise. I mean, you can say, do you mind, can we lose the chunky jewelry and go with something a little more straightforward? Maybe put a lav in someone's hair or on their glasses. There are always workarounds and always solutions, and I think it's critical to actually recognize that. And you may be in a situation where you're not comfortable, and sometimes it just works out. Sometimes you actually lav somebody and you put ears on, and you're like, you know what, that's actually much better than I thought it would be, and it's workable. And I think that's why it's also, I mean, we haven't kind of got into this yet, but there's something to be said for, no, I don't necessarily agree with the whole idea of fix it in post, but sometimes you have to fix it in post, right? So there is a threshold of my comfort level, and I've worked on shows, working on Amazing Race especially. Sometimes you just have to kind of like forgive and forget, right? Something happens, someone's mic, you know, someone put their hand over top because they're having a huge emotional moment. You can't interject yourself and say, we have to cut and do that again. Like, there are no second takes. So learning with what's comfortable, and knowing your project, knowing what the end result, you know, could possibly be, helps a lot in terms of, once again, pick your battles.
And you mentioned Amazing Race, and, you know, when I watch or see any of the behind the scenes footage or stills, obviously it's camera people running with really heavy cameras, and sound guys and sound girls running, you know, just with like all this gear. And to create or to keep a high level of quality in terms of what you're recording, and that it's just not a windy mess of jargly sounds.
Sure.
But also to protect your equipment as well. Describe what that environment's like, and all the different sort of strategies that you use to also deliver the best audio quality and getting. In the same way a cameraman or a camera person is there to get the shot, you're there to capture what needs to be said or what's being said without destroying your equipment. So what happens there?
Well, I think on a show like that, especially, there are people who came before us and basically set the mold, and so we may tweak and improve on things, but there are always solutions out there. I think it's important, on race especially, we actually call it a shake test, where we go out and the camera person and the sound person will go and we'll do a mock run, and in rain, sleet, snow, whatever, it doesn't matter, because you want to get out there and make sure. And that's more about showing up with a level of preparedness more than anything else. Having been through, I worked on one production where we spent a month in Borneo and in the jungle, and when it rains, and it rains straight down, and it can rain for 3 or 4 hours. So I had to, and there is no running to your local local audio store to like pick up a replacement for something. So going into that situation, I had to be absolutely certain across the board that I was covered from top to bottom. So there is something to be said for when you're prepping for a job. You want to kind of try and recreate a situation or a scenario. And sometimes even when you walk into it, I did a shoot in the Arctic. Where it was minus 65, minus 65 degrees, and all my gear, like my LCD screens, froze. Everything, and it got to the point, where we were getting 7 minutes on a camera battery, and at one point our talent just said, "I'm done," and we were like, "Okay, we're finished," right? So there was something to be said for you can prepare as much as possible, and then you're just faced with a situation that you didn't take into consideration, right? And then you just kind of roll with the punches.
How are you, it might be a bit of a weird question, but how are you protecting your gear exactly from all, like Borneo? When I hear Borneo, man, I just hear like everything that wants to eat you and like wet you down and
humid, damp. Yeah.
So how are you protecting your equipment in this particular case?
Well, in that situation, anybody who's any good sound recordist is going to make sure that they have all the right equipment. In that situation in Borneo, I sought the advice of a lot of friends who had worked in jungle conditions before, and said, "What do I need to be prepared?" Experience. So. You need the right covers. You need the right, and that's not just audio. That's also camera as well. You have to. Your kit needs to be rock solid backwards and forwards. So there is something to be said for, and I think that's a huge shout out to my community of people who I work with and who I respect, because there's absolutely nothing wrong where if you feel like that you don't have the prerequisite in terms of experience and knowledge for a gig, but you have a wonderful opportunity to work on something, seek somebody out. The number of times that I have watched something, I've watched either like a documentary or a film, and in the credits I'll find out who the sound recordist was. And then I'll go on Facebook or Instagram, and I'll actually like seek that person out and say, "How did you do that? How did you deal with that situation?" Mm-hmm. And that is an amazing tool, because more than anything else, I will never, if anybody ever approaches me and says, "How did you do that? What techniques did you use to kind of achieve that situation?" I will always be open to kind of sharing information and getting into a dialogue about that, because it's the gift that keeps on giving, because I've sought people out for that experience, and I've had people like seek me out. So that kind of interplay and exchange is critical.
Speaking of people seeking out, we actually got a couple questions from the chat, and Sean would like to know: do you have a particular process or priority list that you follow when deciding how to attach a lav?
That is a big question. This is like, what's interesting is that you can, first and foremost, when working on a documentary, hiding your lav mic, there's so many parameters to take into consideration, but hiding the lav mic, hiding the pack, making someone feel comfortable, making them forget that they're even laved in the first place, which is a common sentiment amongst talent, where they'll say, I forgot that I was even laved, which is what you want. You don't want it to be so obvious and so encumbering and such an issue that they're self-conscious about it, right? So in terms of, I'm more than happy to actually walk through a laving process with somebody. And I mean from like start to finish. So I'll explain what kind of adhesive that I'm using, how I'm gonna hide it, what I'm gonna do to ensure that I don't have to touch them again. Because to me, it's critically important. I don't want to be in people's business, more than once. I want to set it and forget it. And then let them go through their process over the course of a day. Now, mind you, you have to change batteries. There are things that you have to do that are going to kind of interrupt that flow. But for the most part, you really do want a hands-off experience.
Right. And I remember one of the best advice, pieces of advice I ever got when laving people up, especially women, is like, you don't want to just walk up to the person and be like, hey, I need to shove this up your shirt, which is what, like, especially in fast-paced environments, people aren't thinking necessarily. It's all about like that respect, and it's about, oftentimes with women, if I have to lave them up, I'll say, this is where this needs to go. Sure. I'm going to let you do that, and I might kind of sweeten it a bit, but I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to turn around and like either go somewhere else or just not look,
100%.
So that you're not staring at their chest while they're trying to, do this kind of thing. So I always feel like that level of respect, and that goes to any gender, right? Is just to give them the respect in their personal space and their privacy. And I feel like when you do that, they'll reciprocate with a level of comfort, and knowing that they're respected as well. I'm just kind of curious when you hear people say, oh, I didn't even remember that I was laved. Certainly if I'm laved up, I can certainly feel the pack or whatever the case is. Is it because you're using very slender transmitters or things like that? Like, what are some of the ways that you're able to slender it down?
I think it's more about, it's interesting. I think it's, listen, being on camera is intimidating. It's a challenge. And especially when you're working with, people who aren't professionals, when you're working with, I'm nothing but impressed when I work with a host for a television show, and they just kind of get in that mode right away. Right. And they're extremely comfortable. That is something to behold. Or watching someone over the course of a season become a really good on-air personality. So I love and respect. I love watching that process unfold. You don't have that option a lot of the times when you are trying to get, especially working like within the doc world, where you're expected. It's like, look, it's so critical that you make someone feel comfortable. So I wouldn't say that there's a piece of equipment or it's just more technique. And so just to rewind for a second, I think it's, for example, when I'm miking a younger person, it's, let's say mom or dad are nearby. I'll actually instruct them and say, do you mind doing this for me? Can I just explain to you what's going on? And as you mentioned earlier, and then I can tweak things after the fact. And I don't think you have to leave the room per se, but you can just turn around. Right? You can look at your phone. You can do whatever yourself. You can do what you need to do just to seem like, okay, now this is your process. So there is no magic bullet, but there is something to be said. And I think it's one big thing for me is learn people's names. Right? That is whether you're on set or you're in someone's home, like right from the get-go, go up to them, say, hi, Dave, my name is Daniel. I'm the sound recordist on this production. At some point, I will be putting a lab on you just to let you know. But we're going to set up over here for a second. I love your house. I love what you've done. Like the windows look great. There's something to be said for ingratiating yourself into the process.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to take just because we got this question as well, but it's a bit of a non sequitur from this line of talk,
sure.
Which is, what are some of the basic things that you have in your kit? So if you've got, a standard kit that you're going out with, what are some of those things in your kit bag beyond just transceivers and receivers and things like that?
Oh boy. So that's the thing. I think you can have a basic kit. That's a big question because I have a lot of gear and I will tailor a show. I will tailor make a kit based on what, like, on the demands of the show. So, beyond a mixer, a boom, 2 wires, maybe, you certainly want to have IFBs for the director, for the camera people, for the producer. So there is,
So for those who don't know what that is, like the context, if you've never heard of those things before, can you just quickly explain what that is?
Yeah, an IFB is it's a listening device that allows those that are on the periphery to actually hear the content that you're hearing, which I think that's also, like, I have nothing but the utmost respect for camera people who actually want to follow story, and for producers who want to follow content, because if I ever run into a situation where I have a problem, let's say, God forbid, a lav mic falls, right? I don't have to explain myself. Someone's like, we got a problem. I'm like, bingo, right? That kind of ability to communicate a situation when time is short is super, super important. It really depends on the gig. I mean, if I'm just heading out and doing a walk and talk with a host and it's just a lav and a boom, that's super simple. It gets a lot more complex when, let's say, Post is saying that they want 5:1 recordings in the field with a camera person on a documentary. Then it gets a lot more complex. So then there's, then you're bringing out more gear, and there's more of a process. When I'm working on a big show and you have 28 lavs out, when you have a big show and there's a lot going on and there's a lot of moving, that is a wholly different scenario from just working on a simple process.
Mm-hmm. You know what my favorite thing in your kit is your oily skin wipes.
Right. Okay. So that is that is born out of not having a budget, where you show up on set and there's no makeup department, and the person begins to sweat on camera, and the director begins to sweat because they look like that they're all greasy. Yeah. There was something to be said for sure. There is my advice to any sound recordist who's just cutting their teeth at the trade: have a small makeup kit in your bag. Like that is one of my biggest weapons, is being able to, because then how impressive is that when someone's like, oh, so they also do hair and makeup. Fantastic. That's the person who I want to hire again.
I want to get to, I've got a whole bunch of other questions about your process, and I want to actually go back to the Thomas Varga article, and Thomas Varga, the guy who did the sound on Birdman, because there's some really great lessons that you and I talked about within that article. But before we do, let's quickly talk about just equipment for a second, because for people who are not familiar or getting into maybe film or video production and want to start building up an audio kit and not knowing where the priorities should be and what kind of equipment they might have access to between lavs and hypercardioid mics and things like that. Can you give us sort of a basic rundown of what people should expect and what kind of things they should be looking for to start on building up their kit?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's important to. So why don't we parse it into different individuals and their needs. I think if you are a one-person band, my advice to you would be get a really high quality shotgun mic, because that's going to live on your camera. So if it's just you and you're in the mix in the field and you either can't afford a sound person, or space is too tight and you're on your own, I think it's important to have an on-camera shotgun that is I know that at Vistek, Sennheiser and Rode, there's some very, very decent shotguns that you can get there. Sennheiser also sells what I would consider to be the kind of entry level G3, G4 EW1, like 100 units, which they're great. My advice to you is to never use a kit mic. Never use a kit mic, especially when you're recording interviews. So maybe invest, it may seem like it's going to blow your mind, but spend the $400 and go for a Sanken costs $11, which is kind of like the industrial workhorse of our industry, because it can handle high SPLs, it sounds great, and it's super durable. So I think that's critically important. Most importantly, and I can't stress this enough, monitor, listen to content, right? Because that's going to make or break you. Trust your ears. So if you're in a situation where it doesn't sound right, stop, figure it out, and start again.
Right, and you and I offline earlier had this discussion about just the type of entry-level equipment that exists for people, and that much like cameras, in modern cinematography, if you're shooting well and lighting well and everything like that, you can't really tell the difference between what was shot on an A7 III and what was maybe shot on a FS7 or things like that. Like the money doesn't equate to image quality, and it may not equate necessarily to audio quality as well, but it's sort of the usability. How easy is it to make changes and things like that. So what are some of your opinions when people, the H4n or the H6n as a recorder is like super popular? I know I bought one nearly 10 years ago. I still use it today. What are your thoughts on those devices?
I'm simultaneously a gear snob and I'm not, right? Depending on the situation. I think when you have the choice, when you have ample prep time, when you have ideal acoustics, there is something to be said for bringing out the big guns in terms of of gear. I don't, for someone who's just going out there and making, like, content is king, most importantly, and you want to have decent audio and decent corresponding picture, obviously. So I will never fault somebody for showing up with whatever they have, right? To me, it's just capture those elements, because again, to go back to what I mentioned earlier, our job is to collect elements, and our job is to comprehensively give those elements to post, right? Mm-hmm. So workflow is really important. That's one thing we haven't discussed, but when you're working on a complex job, what you should be doing is constructing a workflow so that post can ingest all of this and say, oh, here it is. A great example, there's a documentary called Darwin's Nightmare, where the people involved in making the film were like, look, we can't ever reproduce these sounds, or we don't have the money in post. So go and collect wild elements of audio. So if you hear something that you think sounds fantastic, and you can imagine that kind of laying the bedrock for your FX build, go and record that thing. So I don't care whether you use the shotgun on the camera. You can just literally just point at something and get that thing. And you might as well get some B-roll as well, while you're doing it. So whether you're using an H4n, whether you're using something on your iPhone, just get that thing, right? Because you may not have the ability to ever reproduce what that thing is, and you're there anyways. Yeah,
and actually, speaking of which, is perfect. The questions are coming in fast and furious here, and Mike wanted to know, and I'm just going to read straight from my phone here. Do you have any suggestions for recording nature sounds? Looking for something that can pull in ducks, elk, etc., but cut out the ambient noise.
ducks, elk, etc. I like that. So then we get into, I mean, it depends. I mean, when you're using, this is the interesting thing about when you're doing like ambient recordings or you're recording wildlife. That's when, I mean, bring out your H4n. I mean, it depends. Like what's your budget? If you're willing to spend $10,000, boy, do I have a great microphone for you. There are things that you can choose. So in that case, you get what you don't pay for, if that makes sense. I mean, if you want to go out there and record something, then I would say use. I mean, do you want to do stereo or are we doing mono? Are we doing? There's so many ways that we can approach that. It's an open-ended question.
One of the questions one of the things and observations that I had when we worked together, we shot the Raptors 905, and you were on the court with what looks like a satellite dish.
Yes.
And so is that one of those tools that maybe you can isolate a sound in the distance and ignore all the sound, to the right and to the left?
So using a parabolic dish, which is what you're referring to a certain extent. Don't expect miracles. Yeah. I mean, in that situation, but just to Mike's question, I mean, more importantly, look on the internet, look through chat groups, look through Reddit. There are a lot of people who are, who are smarter, more experienced than I am, who have been through the wars, and I think all that information is available online. Go to a place like True Audio and talk to the people there and say, "This is what I'm looking for. What can you recommend?" Or reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to talk someone through a process. I think it's important to. More importantly, don't show up on the day with your brand new kit and hope to actually perform miracles. Go into a park near your house and try and reproduce that situation. Go home, listen to it, because at the end of the day, preparedness is king, right? And experience is king. So in that regard, it's really just go out there, use your ears, trust yourself, and then see what you're bringing home.
Another question here from Facundo. You mentioned 28 lav inputs. How do you monitor and handle that?
So sorry, to be clear, 28 lavs would be a mixing board. Now that's and that is your lead mixer who is on a mixing board in an isolated space, who's trying to find issues on the day, who is monitoring all that content, who's also doing a submix for everybody else as well. So at that point, you will be bringing it into a board. I would never do 20 lavs in a bag. I know people who do. I worked on intervention once, and we had 14 inputs, and that is a big thing. There's a lot of content. I'm a firm believer in one person can do one thing really well at one time, right? So hence why you can be a one-person band on a production. But it's so important. I would much rather have, if as a producer I was coming onto a show, I want to have, let's say the sound department requires 5 people, hire those 5 people, right? Because they're going to be doing, I've worked on shows where we've had a large sound department, and that's a big thing. That is every single person, no one's slacking. Every single person is doing something. Every single person is making sure that the production is going to flow well.
We got a great question from Sean Story, and Sean, we're going to get to that in a second, but I want to continue this line of thought because this works in perfectly with that article about Birdman and how they were able to accomplish that. And one of the takeaways from how they did the sound in Birdman was twofold for me, and I want you to speak to this. One was the amount of preparation that they had. The sound team was invited to be part of the initial rehearsals a month before principal photography began. And so they had the opportunity in that entire month to do basically what was dress rehearsals with the Alexa, with their full sound kit. And they said that every scene the blocking of every scene didn't change from rehearsals to the day of shooting. And that allowed them to figure out where the mics needed to be, how they were going to block the scenes with the sound recordist, all that sort of stuff. So that was really impressive that they had that amount of preparation. And even he even said in the article that was a surprise to him. He expected to be part of the production about a week before photography began, but it was a month.
Right.
And the second thing, sort of second takeaway, was also how he had the mixing board, and that was on site, but he also had a mobile pack as well that they could, in one take, while the take is going, he could be on the board and then immediately get up and grab the pack and go remote outside, all within the same move. And that helped manage the craziness of that production. So your experience when it comes to preparation with, what different levels of preparation do you get with different productions? How much do you get to fine tune things before you guys effectively, go live? And then what are your strategies in the field in terms of when you want a mixing board console and when you want to be mobile?
I mean, honestly, that's a big question. And all I can say is this. Expect the best and prepare for the worst, right? On a project like Birdman, like the budget they have is, right? And so they're able to actually have that level of preparedness, and you have a director who's actually willing to fight for the audio department and their needs and their wants. It's a big thing, and as people well know, in Canada. I'm nothing if not phenomenally proud of how well as technicians we do, considering we don't have the same kind of budgets that our contemporaries do down south. In a way, I feel like that makes us phenomenal technicians because of it, because we are constantly forced to work with what we have on the day in the situation at hand.
When it comes to prep, basically, when you're not dealing with a huge budget, I'm assuming that your level of prep is basically you're going to be at the Scout or the Tech Recce, and that's pretty much it. Is there any other prep that sound people are usually required to be at in terms of, the day that they're building the cameras at the rental house? Are you going there and trying to make sure that all your stuff meshes with the camera system?
100%. Oh, 100%. There's nothing you don't want to be making up for lost ground on the day. You want to be there for the builds. You want to make sure that there's seamless integration between audio and picture at all times, because you're going to have your hands full at the best of times. The last thing you want to be doing is trying to solve technical issues. And even the number of times I've been on productions where everything was working perfectly the night before, and there's some new wrinkle and there's some new aspect where you have to on the fly figure things out.
It sounds like live streaming.
Yes. And so one thing I wanted to focus on, I think is critically important, and has been a real guiding force in my career, is be kind and be helpful. Honestly, I know it sounds overly simple, but being kind can really set the template for the kind of people who you want to work with in the future, how you're perceived on set. And if you are working in a small, tight-knit, like doc style production, you want to be the one who's loading the camera gear into the vehicle. You want to be the one who's maybe getting a latte for the director. There is nothing wrong. It's like, put your ego in your back pocket and just like be a mensch. Go out there and be the best possible version of you possibly can. Don't show up hungover the next day. There are some guiding rules in terms of like how I want to be perceived and how I want to function on a show. And just be the best possible version of yourself that you can be.
That's, I mean, almost a great thing to end on, but we do have more questions, so we're going to get to that. And I promise Sean that you get to this question. This is a really interesting question from Sean Story. How much do you pay attention to the gear that other departments are using on set? And have you integrated any of those elements into your kit?
That's interesting. Okay. I have to admit, I know Sean's story, and I know that he's trying to catch me in like a gotcha question right now, which I appreciate. Yeah, I mean, I love the fact when I mean, nothing makes me happier than when I am working with a small crew and that I am able to collaborate, and I am able to learn from other departments about how to do their job and how to do my job really well. So in terms of integration, there's for the most part, audio integrates with camera and not the other way around.
Yeah. And so do you have, and that actually makes me think of a question, are there camera systems that, you know, because you're sending sometimes time code to the camera, you're sending audio signals to the camera, are there camera systems that are always a joy to work with, and are there camera systems that are always a nightmare to work with from an audio person's perspective?
So you're asking me to like stake my ground here with certain, yes. Okay. So if we're talking, okay. If we're going to put it out there, not a big Red fan. So I apologize to all my DP friends. Ari is, Ari is phenomenal. Ari is a great company. They produce rock solid gear. It's intuitive. Integrating is like hyper simple. So yeah, there are. I do have preferred systems that I like to work with, because tried and true. I've been in the field and I've had real issues where there's nothing else I could have done to kind of problem solve that. And I don't want to crap on this. There is a tool for every job, and it's not necessarily up to me. If a DP wants to come on set and work with a 60 millimeter camera, that's completely their prerogative. Mm-hmm. I'm just there to like support them in their process.
Yeah, and what are your strategies when working with like DSLRs and mirrorless cameras that have only like a 3.5 jack in? Do you have any particular strategies around what you'll use in those particular situations?
Yes. Again, have a day where you can set up, you can set up your whole rig and find that integration, find out what works best, then output that and then test it with post. Mm-hmm. That is like, above all else. There are systems that I know that I can walk in on the day and I can firmly integrate into. When you're working with things that aren't necessary, when you're kind of like jury rigging situations, you really want to take that thing for a spin first. Give it a shake test. Make sure that thing is going to work under duress, and make sure that that integration, because it's not necessarily designed for that thing, and maybe you are using specially built cables. Don't show up on the day. I mean, make sure you take it for a test spin before.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of, and I can't remember if I've ever done this before, and I've heard other sound people talk about this as well, where if you've got a stereo in on a 3.5, that you can get a splitter and basically send one level higher and one level 100%. Lower to protect any sort of transients like that. Is that something that you do often, even when you're plugging into a regular XLR port?
Yeah, so I mean, in that case, to kind of like retread for a second, talk about like having a one-man band. We were in a situation recently on a show where there couldn't be a sound mixer couldn't be present for the interview process. So we had specialty cables made where we were able to go from a boom, then split into the camera, into the left and right channel, and then we kind of found that optimum setting on the camera, but then we had -10 or -15 on the second channel, just to actually deal with transients. So, and it works surprisingly well. So while I would always say, yes, have someone there, I don't want to like put myself out of a job. I'm always going to say have someone there who can monitor. But in a situation where you can't, there are certainly workarounds. But trust your audio department. Talk to them about it first.
Awesome. That's kind of wrapping up our time, but I want to give you sort of the opportunity to just dispel any or disperse any bit of last minute advice to folks who are either producers or directors or aspiring sound techs.
Sure.
What's the one message you really want to get out beyond being an awesome person, which you've already stated and you are? What would you like to say?
Yeah, I would say this. I mean, I've said it before. I'll say it again. Be kind, and I'll tell you why. Because that PA who you crap on, that PA who you treat with, who you treat with disdain, is going to be your boss in 5 years, potentially.